destructive force of 15,000 tons of TNT, a mass of rubble. Yet, less than a mile from ground zero, a human being in a shelter should have survived. That was the end. Here was the beginning. These, the characters in this drama of survival under the A-bomb, a program being conducted by Federal Civil Defense, the Atomic Energy Commission, and the Department of Defense to show the nation the effects of atomic blast on homes, home-type shelters, and automobiles. A variety of passenger cars, old and new, loaned by the dealers and manufacturers of America. The time, March 1953. The scene, Las Vegas, as the caravan sets out for the site of AEC's Nevada Proving Grounds. There, the test will be held in connection with a shot in the Atomic Energy Commission's developmental series. Yucca Flat, a barren area of desert, sagebrush, and Joshua trees, now suddenly comes alive with activity. On each car, instruments to measure excessive temperature increases. Also a film badge for detection of gamma radiation. The vehicles, identified by number, are stationed at various ranges from ground zero. Into each car go these lifelike department store mannequins, donated by private sources to help determine the effect of atomic blast. And here, one of the two typical American frame dwellings to be tested. This one, 7,500 feet from ground zero. Each home is to reveal effects of atomic blast only. Indoors are no utilities that might cause fire. Venetian blinds on windows facing the blast help keep out heat flash. They are not supposed to resist blast. Within the house, scenes typical of the American family at home. First floor living room, first floor dining room. Children at play, unaware of approaching disaster. A sick bed upstairs. Yes, a family unprepared, without this simple box-type shelter shown here in a model. In such a shelter, a family has prepared and awaits the bomb, soon to explode from this 300-foot tower nearly a mile and a half away. House number 1, 3,500 feet from ground zero. 1,450 feet away, this outdoor shelter of reinforced concrete. Entrances to other outdoor shelters to be tested. Here, a model provides an interior view of a basement exit type home shelter. One of these was only 1,250 feet from ground zero. Meanwhile, at Las Vegas, newsmen and photographers arrive from all over the nation to cover an event that has a direct bearing on the welfare of every American family. This way to a general briefing by officials of the Atomic Energy Commission, Defense Department, and Civil Defense. Then out to Yucca Flat. Here, just before dawn, for the first time in our history, American homes will be exposed to atomic blast. Arriving are civil defense observers, representatives of all the nation's news media. Today, Main Street of every American city and town. House number 2 is inspected as preparations continue for detonation of the bomb at 5:20 next morning. 2 a.m. Our troops move into trenches 2 miles from ground zero. With them is Federal Civil Defense Administrator Val Peterson. In the darkness of News Knob, 7.5 miles from ground zero, nearly 1,000 observers gather. Civil defense officials from all over the nation, newsreel, radio, and television crews, newsmen and magazine writers, ready to bring to the families of America this drama of survival under the A-bomb. The hours slowly tick away. Then the minutes. 10 seconds to 5:20 a.m. 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. House number 1 as the blast hits it. On News Knob, civil defense observers witness effects of the blast in the tremendous glare of the fireball. Here again is house number 1 collapsing, shown now in stop motion. First an intense light, the heat flash strikes, charring the outer surface of the house without causing fire. Foaming, blackened particles of whitewash are forced upward by the heat flash. In the right corner of the screen, smoke rises from the wooden base of the metal floodlight pole. The scene darkens as the blast wave brings heavy clouds of dust. The forward part of the roof is snapped upward like a lid, crashing into the rear yard. Now the blast wave gets inside and the house, under tremendous pressure, blows apart. Remember, what you have seen here in detail happened in just 2 1/3 seconds. Within minutes after the blast, our troops move into no man's land as part of their own test exercise. Civil defense teams could have moved in just as quickly to rescue the injured. In the cold light of dawn, television cameras on News Knob make the threat of the mushroom cloud a dark reality in homes across the nation. First to arrive from the forward area is Federal Civil Defense Administrator Val Peterson. Escorted to News Knob, the top FCDA official reports his experience. In the trench with our troops only 2 miles from ground zero, he suffered no effects from blast, heat, or radiation. Information about test results is given by Dr. Alvin C. Graves, Atomic Energy Commission Test Director. Radiological safety teams begin checking the forward area to determine the level of radiation. House number 2, farthest from ground zero, badly damaged but still standing. On house number 2 exterior, blown out windows, sashes, and frames. Remember this family? They did not take shelter. Their living room after the blast. Mannequins thrown about, clothing cut, plaster bodies pockmarked by flying glass. Remember this dining room group? Again, effects of an atomic blast in the house farthest from ground zero. Injury, perhaps death, in a tangle of debris, the result of being unprepared. Second floor bedroom, plaster and windows damaged, roof sprung, rafters broken. House number 1, nearest ground zero, almost complete destruction, a mass of rubble and debris. The roof blown into several sections. Now you enter house number 1, first floor disintegrated, second floor collapsed. No protection for this family trapped in debris. Note the pushed-back wooden girders, blocked, the stairway into the basement. Part of the kitchen and dining room have fallen into the basement. Yet, in this lean-to shelter, you discover indications that a human being might have survived the blast with simple protection. In house number 2, a cracked beam above the basement box-type shelter. But within, this family, which was prepared, was neither moved nor harmed. Outdoors, at various ranges from ground zero, nearly every car driven into the area could be driven out again under its own power in spite of damage. Headlines brought the Operation Doorstep story into the homes of 30 million families, left them wondering how they might be affected. Engineering research goes on. Other civil defense tests will be held. But already we know these facts. An outdoor shelter provides the best chance for survival from atomic blast. Second safest, a basement lean-to or box-type shelter. Your local civil defense office can provide construction data for these simple, inexpensive home shelters. Today, there is no second best for families' civil defense. The urgent need to prepare now against the threat of atomic warfare. Or will you, like a mannequin, just sit and wait?
The picture we are about to see we must remember that the explosive power of atomic bombs used in this test was in the kiloton range. The explosive power of today's hydrogen bomb is measured in terms of megatons. What does that mean to us? It's a matter of practical application. It takes 1,000 kilotons to equal 1 megaton. And by applying the scaling laws, the proportionate comparative effects of a larger bomb can be determined. The A bomb exploded here was rated at approximately 30 kilotons. For comparison, let's use a 20 megaton H bomb. The 20 megaton bomb, therefore, would be 667 times as strong as a 30 kiloton bomb. The relationship between distance for any given pressure and the size of nuclear weapons follows the cube root scaling law. So theoretically, a hydrogen bomb of 20 megatons at approximately 8.5 miles would have about the same destructive power as an atomic bomb of 30 kilotons at 1 mile. In this test, many of the structures were approximately 1 mile from ground zero. In the case of a 20 megaton H-bomb explosion, most of these structures undoubtedly would be obliterated. And actually, at a distance of 8.5 to 9 miles from ground zero, with the longer duration of blast pressure, we could expect conditions even more severe than those at 1 mile from ground zero in this test. This atomic test, although depicting the severe effects of a nuclear weapon, does not reflect the extent and severity of destruction that would result from a nuclear weapon in the multi-megaton range.
Here at the Atomic Energy Commission's Nevada test site, I covered the story of Operation Cue, a program to test the effects of an atomic blast upon the things we use in our everyday lives.
Operation Cue, the atomic test program of the Federal Civil Defense Administration, as seen by June Cowan, reporter.
I had to see Operation Cue through many eyes, not only my own, but as a reporter through the eyes of the average American man and woman. I arrived at Civil Defense Headquarters the day before the explosion was scheduled to take place and checked in at once with the official who was to brief me about the test. To give me a perspective of the entire layout, a member of the Civil Defense staff showed me a carefully prepared model of the site. The scope of the test and the detailed care with which it had been planned amazed me as I listened to the explanation.
We begin with the question of shelter, for shelter might save our lives if we were far enough away from ground zero. If so, what kinds of shelter are effective? Several kinds are to be tested, from elaborate industrial shelters to the box-type shelter in the corner room of a basement. This type would give more room for a family, especially if it were necessary to remain there for several days. In this frame house without a basement, at the 4,700-foot line, we will test a bathroom shelter built of reinforced concrete. The entrance door and outside window covering are designed to resist blast.
I asked about the possible loss of utilities and what this would mean to survivors. No electricity for running a home or an industrial plant.
Loss of power may be one of our biggest problems after an attack. Power poles, power lines, pole transformers, and complete substations are to be tested by the Edison Institute. How will they withstand this blast? How long will it take to make repairs? How soon can service be reestablished? These are things we hope to learn from the test. One complete transformer substation has been erected relatively close to the shot tower. A second substation and power lines have been placed at a much greater distance from the tower.
Thinking about news during an atomic attack, I asked about radio towers.
Two kinds are to be tested. One tower is self-supporting without guy wires. The other has supporting cables. Both types are very common. Nearby, a complete radio transmitter will actually broadcast from tape before the shot to be picked up by radios in the test houses. Both liquefied petroleum and natural gas facilities will be tested. Will the fittings and connections stand the test? Will there be fires? All equipment is installed and checked by technical experts from the LP Gas Association and the American Gas Association. An 18,000-gallon supply tank, partially filled with propane and complete with feed pipes. A weighing and storage house and delivery platform have been erected on the test site.
I was anxious to learn all I could about the various types of houses to be tested.
5 types are prepared for exposure to the blast and heat of this atomic explosion. First, a single-story frame rambler without basement built on a concrete slab. Second, a 2-story masonry with basement constructed of brick backed with 4-inch cinder blocks. Third, a house of 8-inch concrete blocks reinforced with steel. The 4th type is a single-story rambler made of precast lightweight concrete. Walls and roof panels were joined by welding steel lugs. The 5th, at the 5,500-foot line, is a redesigned house similar to one previously tested. This new design provides additional strength at a cost increase of approximately 10%. That's the real purpose of testing these houses, to find their weak points. Through the cooperation of the furniture and appliance industries, household furnishings were installed in the houses. Mannequin families supplied by private industry are to represent Mr. and Mrs. America.
Interior home furnishings donated by industry are complete in every detail. I looked at the mannequins sitting about so indifferently. Naturally, I was very interested in preparations for the testing of textiles and synthetic fabrics.
Rows of mannequins were set up in the open facing the blast. Each item of clothing and each color had been carefully selected to give much needed survival information.
I was especially interested in the food test program. Canned and packaged foods are to be tested. As a mother and housewife, this appealed to me. I had several questions to ask. Would food in the average home be safe to eat after a blast?
Food testing in Operation Q is planned to answer this and other vital questions. Some foods are to be tested in the house, stored in the usual way. Other foods, including fresh meats, butter, and similar perishables, are to be tested just below the level of the ground at 3 positions along the main test line. This will expose the food to high-intensity radiation without risking destruction of the containers. Test items include sterilized foods packaged in cartons, metal, and glass. All will be exposed according to plan to give us the most survival information.
The night of the actual explosion, or rather early in the morning, came at last. On Media Hill, television equipment was ready to bring the test into homes from coast to coast. Reporters, commentators, military and civil defense observers all had a purpose: to study the results of this explosion. At a position a mile forward from Media Hill, the Civil Defense Field Exercise Group had assembled with their equipment. A small group of civil defense volunteers were to occupy a trench relatively close to ground zero. On Media Hill, where I remained, there was hot coffee, last-minute briefings, and more waiting. But it seemed no time at all before the loudspeaker warned,
H-minus 1 minute. Put on your goggles. Observers without goggles must face away from the blast.
On the silent desert, the test objects waited.
H-minus 10 seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
24 hours elapsed before we were permitted to view at first hand the results of the explosion.
Let's see how the blast affected the houses. This is what remained of the masonry house that was not reinforced. This is the house constructed of reinforced concrete blocks after the explosion. Although the redesigned two-story frame house was severely damaged, the structural improvements had strengthened its resistance considerably. As seen here, although basement shelters offered some degree of protection, they cannot be depended upon completely in potential blast areas. The reinforced bathroom shelter was standing intact beneath the ruins of the house, so this type also offered some degree of protection. The upper section of one unguided radio tower collapsed from the tremendous force of the blast. The guide tower was slightly twisted by a power pole which fell across one of the guy wires. Within the concrete radio house, equipment had been shaken up. But as soon as power was restored, the transmitter resumed broadcasting. The 18,000-gallon tank of liquefied petroleum gas was undamaged. Tests showed that even the connections were intact. The weighing and storage house was scattered across the desert, but the consumer-sized tanks were unharmed. Power lines and transformers suffered some damage, but most of the power poles were still standing or could be repaired. The power substation was not seriously harmed. Edison Institute personnel tested all lines and found the station to be operative. The food and cases of canned goods were taken away for laboratory tests.
Do you remember this young lady? This tattoo mark was left beneath the dark pattern. And this young man, this is how the blast charred and faded the outer layer of his new dark suit. During all this activity, the mass feeding group was improvising to feed the test observers. I particularly remember some roast beef. It was done to perfection and roasted in cans which could have been salvaged from demolished buildings. I watched the people eating and realized that mass feeding is an important job in civil defense. I took a last look at the debris and devastation. This time it was only a test, a well-planned test, not a real attack. It was a test of the things we use in everyday life.
Many lessons were learned from this test that affect civil defense planning. And it must be borne in mind that multi-megaton weapons would result in much greater damage over a larger area. All these factors must be considered as we plan for the survival of our homes, our families, and our nation in the nuclear age.